this is something that I really love. This is something that's going to be in my life. I'm going to be essentially a counselor by day, dancer by night type of deal. Kind of like Batman, except I won't have a face mask or like a eye mask, whatever.
You could masquerade.
You'll never know. You just have to be like, stand your ground, like stand your ground, be like, this is something that I really like. I'm not going to stop doing this. If you like doing it and you're hiding it from your family, or you like doing it and you haven't told your family yet, think about what's going to happen when you stop doing it because your family said this isn't okay, or this isn't like the appropriate thing to do, or whatever. And think about what's going to happen, what that's going to make you feel when you can't do what you love or what you're interested in because your family said no.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the VentureCast podcast. Today we have on with us Wendy, the one with the ugly bob, and my good friend Shareef.
What's up?
How do you pronounce your last name again?
Alwarasneh.
No,
you've missed a whole syllable at the end. Alwarasneh. There you go.
Okay. Shareef A.
Or Shareef alphabet soup.
Shareef
because that can work.
And we're here visiting you all the way up in Rochester, New York. Thank you for having us here.
Thanks for coming.
Are you excited to be on the podcast?
Yeah, I'm excited for you guys to be here, and I'm excited to be on this. First time that I'm a guest on a podcast.
So you've been living up in Rochester for how long now?
6 going on 7 years.
Damn, dude.
Yeah.
And you've been living all by yourself in this apartment?
For the past few years, yeah. Living by myself is great.
Yeah. Because me and Wendy had to get out of our parents' place because too much nagging and annoying stuff from family here and there.
No, I'm the one that nags.
Yep. Now she's my mommy.
No, stop.
My mommy.
I gotta go, my Uber's here.
But speaking on family stuff, you grew up with a very, I would say probably traditional Palestinian cultural background. Can you give us a little more on that?
Yeah, it's a really different experience from like growing up just like with the monoculture, I guess, because I grew up in a Palestinian household in the US. So I've got 2 cultures going on at the same time. Everything outside of the household is, US culture, American culture. Everything inside the house is Palestinian culture. And so there were times where I would feel very like confused in some certain like contexts, like being out with friends or whatever, like I might present as more Palestinian, or not necessarily present as more Palestinian, but maybe act a little more Palestinian. And then it might switch to more American in other contexts. Like I know my family would sometimes say like, oh, you're more American. Like not necessarily my nuclear family, but like extended family, they'd talk to me to be like, oh, you act more American or something like that. I'm like, I don't know what that means, but okay. And then people here would tell me, oh, you're so like Arab, you're not American, you're Palestinian. I'm like, so what the hell is this? It's like then it becomes, at some point, it becomes a mesh of the 2 cultures. So it like becomes a third. And sometimes it just like changes depending on where I'm at and who I'm with.
So what would your, I guess your family or your personal definition of Palestinian culture mean for you?
I would say very, like there's more group harmony involved. We care more about like the community and stuff like that. And there's really a focus on like community interaction versus like the US, because it's a Western country and a Western culture. It tends to be more individualist. So there's a focus on the self and development of the self, and there's like family values and stuff, but not as heavy as you would find in Palestine or similar cultures.
It sounds pretty familiar to probably me and Wendy's culture, where we grew up, traditional Chinese. So it's a lot of kind of maintaining family values and family reputation amongst like a larger society. Do you think that kind of reflects on your family culture as well?
I would agree. I would definitely see that. It's very much like, you got to be the good like Palestinian person. You got to follow all these rules, and then you're like set. And then adding on that complexity of like the Muslim identity as well is like very much that. So when you break out of that in any way, it tends to really go against like the core values of each culture. It's very like saving face a lot and never talking about certain things like you and I were talking about yesterday. Like mental health is not something that's like widely spoken about. It's like you're seen as weak, or when you talk about emotions or anything mental health related. So and other things like, you know, if you express yourself differently in terms of like your gender expression or your fashion choices or whatever, like really deviates, and it's like, how is this going to affect the family? Like you didn't think about the family or something like that.
How you carry yourself out in public, it's kind of you're an extension of your family. That's how they see you in a lot of Asian cultures and Arabic cultures.
Like saving face and making sure that, you know, you are matching what your family and what the society that you're a part of expects you to be in terms of like your gender. So like if you look like a guy, you need to act like a guy, and like you need to be that like strict definition of like what a male is in that culture. So like alpha masculine, like masculinity is defined differently in different areas of the world, but like, you know, whatever that culture sees it as, you need to match that. Or like same with like being a woman in that culture or whatever. If you were to blur the lines a little bit, or if you were to step out even just slightly, then it's like a really like big step out, and it's just like
the nail that sticks out gets hammered in,
basically.
Right.
Yeah They try to like push you back into that box of like, you're supposed to be this, so like stay there.
The way they force you into these certain kind of social roles or like gender roles, whatever it is, these very firm definitions. Like, have you ever had like family try to restrict you from being your individual self?
For me, I'm like, just didn't really care about like the super masculine stuff, and not to say that I'm extremely feminine or anything like that, but I think I'm somewhere in that like gray zone of like a balance. And some people just really don't understand that. And especially coming from family, like when they would see I'd come home, like they would not let me dye my hair at all. They would not let me really grow out my hair either. Like that was something that was super, super strict. Was like, boys are not supposed to have long hair. They're supposed to get their hair cut every 2 weeks, and it's supposed to be short, like an inch long at most. And then it, you know, anything slightly longer than that, you have to go get a haircut immediately. Oh, your hair's too long.
Your hair is spectacular, by the way.
Thank you.
Looks great. But even with like hair, it's barely even shoulder length. It just kind of goes down your neck, and they're gonna like nip you for that. Is there anything that's like way beyond what's socially accepted in that culture?
If someone were to get tattoos or piercings, for example, like I've got some piercings, like I've got my nose pierced right here. I've got my earlobes pierced, but like, you know, for my family, they freaked about my earlobes. Like they didn't like at the time when I had just my earlobes, they had freaked. My mom freaked out. She's just like, what the hell? Like, that's not okay. This, that. And like, she's trying to talk to me about it. I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's fine. And it was just that like gender role expectation from my culture too. Of like, men aren't supposed to do this. Anything that emulates something that a woman would do makes a man look effeminate or feminine. And it's just like, that's bad. That's against social rules. And then you have to be beaten back into the box. Pretty much. Not that I was like physically beaten, but just using that as like a metaphor. You know, my family just really like blew it out of proportion. My dad took it so much worse. We were headed to like a restaurant, and he was taking me and my brother out, and I thought he was going to drive off the highway at some point because of how upset he was. And he was just like, oh, haha, like you got your ears pierced. And I'm like, yep. And he started to boil because it seemed like he wanted me to be upset about what I did. And that, for me, I was just like, no, I'm like, this is my body. Like, let me do what I want to do. I'm not telling you what to do with your body. I'm not telling you to go get your head shaved or do whatever. So don't involve yourself. Even if you are my parent, this is not any of your business. So,
please do not involve yourself. And that's a really conflicting thing in my culture. And a lot of people would be like, how the hell did you do that? I'm like, this is my body, my say. Like,
I'm all for individualism. I don't really like being confined to the little box that's been preset for you. So I'm really glad that you're kind of taking these steps for yourself to define who you are as a person.
yeah.
But are there still cultural values that you personally still believe in from growing up?
That's a good question.
Like, for example, I'm always like the type of person, like, if I was the straight cut standard Chinese guy, I would be, a businessman, a doctor, whatever, and then I'd be working to start a family by the age of like 14 or something, and buying a house to move in my parents and taking care of the grandkids and living my life for them to fulfill their will and wishes. And to some extent, I still want that for them because I still care about my family. But obviously doing something like the podcast is not something that they would understand. It's kind of beyond what tradition has to offer or what's expected out of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of try to maintain this balance of there are things that I still want to achieve because these family values were built into me growing up and I still respect them. Does that kind of vibe with you?
Sometimes things just like intermesh, like with the two cultures that I was talking about, being from US culture and also like being a culture to Palestinian culture in that household. So I haven't not necessarily thrown out everything, but there are some things that I'm just like, nope, yes, no. Respecting the elders, but when they're wrong, like they need to know that they're wrong. Or not necessarily know that they're wrong, but just like,
you can't let them kind of get their way.
Yeah, because they'll say some racist things or they'll say something like really screwed up, and I'm like, that's not okay. And then I start telling them, they're like, don't argue, like don't talk back to me. I'm like, you're saying something kind of screwed up. Like, no, you need to hear this.
There's like a lot of shame culture and that kind of thing where they'll, if you don't match their picture perfect definition, they'll just try to guilt trip you into whatever which way that they want you to be. And it really sucks because even for myself or for Wendy, your mom is super hard on you for being the way that you want and not being this Asian movie actress of, oh, I'm gonna find this rich Chinese husband and he's gonna take care of me and my lovely mother.
Even though it's completely hilarious and it sounds absurd, it's very true. Like, we actually know someone who has adapted to that standard where you have to be very feminine, slow paced talking, and it sounds like everything you say sounds like a request and not a decision you made on your own. Like in American culture, you say what the hell you want. You say whatever the hell you want, right? You could say you curse at someone across the street and they'll be fine. But in Chinese culture, at least with my family, it's like I wasn't allowed to say the F word my entire life. And when I did, she like almost tried to beat the shit out of me. And then I did it all the time and she had no power over that. So that's where like the American culture kind of overpowered the Chinese culture. Because even though she was very traditional, she wasn't stronger and like she couldn't enforce it anymore. So I guess my question to you is like, how did you get to that point where you're like, yeah, I'm mixed, my cultures are mixed, but it doesn't matter because my well-being is way more important than traditional values?
I think a little bit of that started in my first year of college. And it was at a place that I wasn't really happy in. And my mom was like super happy that I was there. It wasn't a college that she had necessarily forced me to apply to or anything like that. Like she was super supportive in my college decisions. But when I told her I wanted to leave, she was like, why would you leave for social reasons? Like you're not fitting in with the students, or like it's not that great of a fit for you as a school or whatever. Like you're there for education, that's it. And I'm like, Mom, I'm not going to spend like 4 or 5 years at this place and be unhappy that whole time just to get a degree and then be out. Like, yeah, it might help me get a job later, but maybe it's not realistic in Palestinian culture or Arab culture in general to like do something like that. But like the other school that I wanted to go to fit me socially and academically. It was great too. So what's the issue? And so then that's when there was like a long time during that year where I felt alone in that decision of like, at least with my mom. My friends were super supportive, but I felt super alone in that decision of choosing to want to transfer. And then that's when I realized that this was one of those situations where I can take my happiness into my own hands, and this is my life. Like I can control this decision. So I did that. And then I was like, my mom is still supportive. She probably like was always just like, he should have stayed at, that first school, whatever. But, she saw how much I grew at the other school. So I don't see why she would still think that. But, I still had a great college experience. I got out with a great degree, did really well in school, pretty involved in like extracurriculars and whatnot. So I realized that like my happiness was something that I took into my own hands, and that really translated to other parts of my life too. So that came down to piercings, like at one point, like I was like, I like the idea of like what a piercing would look like on me. And so like I would go and I went to like Spencer's or whatever, and I found like fake pieces of jewelry, like, oh, like a nose ring or whatever. Like, how would that look on me? And I was like, oh, it looks cool. So let's get a nose piercing. Which it's hard to see, but it kind of looks like a mole on my nose. But but then like my lobes, I was like, I got the magnetic. They're like
clip-on earrings.
They're like clip-on. They're like they look like gauges almost, but they don't go deep into your skin. It's just magnet. Mm-hmm. So I put them on. And I was like, ooh, yes, I like this. So I went along with it. Then I listened to myself in that moment. It wasn't like I'm doing this to, have this person like want to ask me out on a date, or like I'm trying to look good for, this thing or whatever. Like it was just like, oh, I like this. It looks great on me. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's just like that autonomy. And I was like, I know this goes against my cultural values, but I'm like, meh, I have to do what I want to do.
Nice. I'm proud of you for that.
Yeah,
honestly.
good job on the self-loving journey.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and also the biggest part of it is like, yeah, it's like self-love, but at the same time, it's like that decision really is not going to affect anyone. I'm not hurting anyone physically or emotionally. And if people can look at it from a different perspective of like, yes, you're hurting your family emotionally by putting on piercings, and then that will, you'll lose cultural currency and social currency, whatever, in your society and in your community. And I'm like, that's because they think it does. And that's in their worldview. And they think, oh, if my son does this, then it's going to affect me. And I'm like, Mom and Dad, you got a divorce. So stop caring about my piercings. That divorce is pretty bad. So why are you so fixated on me? And that's the part that I like had an issue with my parents, was like with the piercings was, they just once they saw the piercings, they completely forgot about all of my other accomplishments. How I'm like, I would say I'm a decent person, like
yes, very much so.
Thank you.
Wonderful person.
But I would
Facts.
But like, why did that all of a sudden, because I got my ears pierced, that took away from all my accomplishments? Didn't make sense to me, and that's really the part that I had trouble with.
Mm-hmm. I have so many things to say on that, but
and at least culturally, reputation is so important for no reason. It's like, in reality, it doesn't mean anything at all.
Yeah.
But for people who follow traditions, it's like,
it's everything.
That's all you live for. You don't go to school to get a well-paying job. You go to school to become that doctor that everyone goes to. Like, nah.
Yeah,
not
like
for me.
Even for me, like I went to I don't know, like maybe renowned middle school / high school, but then I didn't make the cut for the high school program. However, my mom will still tell family and otherwise, oh yeah, Anthony did go to this like high-end high school and he graduated with like 4.0 GPA. I'm like, no, I didn't do any of that, but you just want to brag for some reason.
My mom grew up in the US, but like she came from a Palestinian household as well. So her and I have that similarity in the third culture, like the Palestinian American culture, versus my dad, who immigrated to the US when he was early in his adulthood. he still has that like really heavy emphasis on like let's talk about, you know, status and stuff like that. Like, oh, my son is a doctor. Oh, he's very good doctor, you know. They're just like, oh, you need to be like your uncle Dr. Ali, you know, he needs to be like him, you know, he's doctor. Like, it's not the no,
not
I don't
the
want
path
to.
you
I
can-
fought with my parents because my mom wanted me to do it for my mom. They both wanted me to be a doctor, like physician, medical doctor. They're like
Typical, yeah.
typical, you know. My mom for actually like helping people, like she just was more of like the altruistic reason and like genuine like humanistic reason of like go help others,
Which is good.
which is good, and I appreciated that, but I was like not interested. Versus my dad, I called him out on it. I was like, you wanted me to be a doctor because, excuse me, for status reasons, so you could use that, you know, in the community, be like, oh, my son is doctor, oh, you know, blah 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 blah, his cultural and social currency go up and this that. I'm like, and he's like, no, I wanted you to do it to help people. I'm like, no, I can see right through you. No. But I argued with them like growing up. They're just saying, just say God willing, you know, the word is inshallah in Arabic. And I was like,
What is
no, inshallah or
And-
inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Which is God willing. And I'm like, no.
Right. I love it when they use like religion against you. It's like, yeah, God told you to. And it's like, but if God did it, why do I like something else? You know,
Yeah.
a different passion, a different
Right.
identity,
Right.
where it's like not fitting in the culture.
Yeah, it's just like, if your God doesn't like me, then I don't like your God. Go away.
Right. I mean, that was interesting because like my mom was supportive of me because I first went into electrical and computer engineering, or actually, yeah, that was my program, electrical and computer engineering. I did great my first year, and then I was just like, something in this buttermilk ain't clean. Like, this doesn't feel right, you know.
I've never heard that before, but okay.
Trying to remember what TV show that came from, but there's a GIF, and I'll show y'all later where it came from. But anyways, I was just like, oh, something's not right. I don't like this. My mom was just like, oh, great, like you're gonna like it's a great job, like it's super secure, and like, you know, you'll always like have a job in this. And then I dropped it like it's hot when I transferred. I was like, nope. And even when I was an engineering major, my dad was just like, why not at least become get a PhD in psychology or something like that? And I'm like,
He agreed to psychology?
That's
he was
surprising.
trying to like get on the lower end of the doctor spectrum.
Ah.
He was just like, you know, at least like, I remember one of our family friends literally pulled me off to the side when we were like heading out one day. We were hanging out at his place, and he pulled me off to the side to have a conversation. And he's like, you know what, like, why not like be a doctor in psychology, blah blah blah. And at the time I was still an engineering major, so I was like, this is a great job. There's so many jobs and not enough people to fill them in this computer industry. So like,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
what's the problem? He's like, you know, but like psychology, like being a doctor. And I'm like, no. And then my dad comes up. He's like, I didn't tell him to tell you any of that. And I'm like, but you definitely brought this up, so that's why he's talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I ended up like pursuing linguistics, and I, as someone who loves languages, like, it almost makes sense for me to pursue linguistics. So linguistics is the study of what makes a language versus communication. So I'm a polyglot who knows several languages, which means poly means many, and glot comes from the word glottis in Greek, which means tongues. So comes together means many tongues. And someone who identifies as a polyglot means that they know multiple languages.
I'm a polyglot in other ways.
Delete from podcast.
Poop.
Anyways, here's Wonderwall. But as a as a polyglot, like I loved interacting with people because it helped me to gain a perspective on the world through a different language. So it gave me like a different way of like seeing concepts in the world, and also connecting with people. Like, it was a really great way for me to connect with people. Like, I loved seeing people's genuine reactions of like, you know, I'd start speaking to them in their native language, and they're like, you know my language? Because like, that's, you know, language is something that's so core to our identities that like, sometimes like when we're talking with each other who speak the same language, we don't always think about that. But let's say we were to go abroad, you know, or somebody comes from abroad and is studying here or whatever, and you engage with that core part of their identity, like it really creates an opportunity for a genuine connection. They're like, oh my God, like like it's kind of like in their head, it's like you're engaging with that core part of my identity. Like, let's chat more, like let's get to know each other or whatever, or like let's hang out, you know, like platonic sense, romantic sense, whatever, you know, in any sense it could happen. It's just showing that you're making a step towards someone. That's really what I loved about learning languages, and that's why I continue to do so. Although it's been a while since I've learned a new language, school's been in the way a little bit, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that, like when I try to attempt putting my like level 1 language skills on anyone, and it's fun to see like their eyes light up and like, wow, you said like you're speaking Spanish, and I'm like, I am 14 years old, I am 11. It's like, you're wrong, but good try. But we like you.
Yeah, exactly. Like people people really appreciate that. For the most part, like you'll get people who are like, oh my God, like, wow, like, you know, you might not be fluent, but you're still taking that step towards them, especially if you're like continuing learning their language. Yeah. And then now I still love learning languages, and I'm taking that with me into my grad program, which is not linguistics, but is mental health counseling. And so taking that into the counseling realm of like, you know, how do I bring multicultural representation, but also cultural understanding and intersectionality into my practice? Because, you know, not only in mental health counseling, but in a lot of professions, there's not enough discussion about, you know, representation of like people of color or of different backgrounds, or, you know, people who might identify from like a minority group or whatever label they might use. Bringing nuanced cultural understanding is like super important in our world, and it's going to become even more and more relevant. Like it's gaining traction. So for me, like that's just something important for me to, you know, when I'm counseling someone, I want to be able to have that conversation of like, tell me about you, tell me about your cultures, and let's work on this, because I'm not going to impose anything on you. I want to understand that, like, where is the core stuff coming from that you are bringing, like, what are the complaints that you're bringing, and how do your identities and your experiences influence that? Because the world, like, their experiences are intersectional in nature. They're not just like one thing. They're not just, you know, like in my instance, I'm not just Arabian and I'm not just male. Like, it's both at the same time.
Right.
You know, I'm a brown person in the US, you know, like how does that like affect my experience, you know, with the predominantly
factors, right?
Yeah. Like there's a lot of factors that people don't take into account. And really having that cultural understanding, and like really not just like studying it from a distance, but also like trying to engage with it, is a really core part into like what I want to do with counseling and my connection with people and helping others connect, if that makes sense.
You have a very virtuous way or purpose behind it, and I'm glad to hear that.
I want to help people and communities build relationships with each other, because I think that's where a lot of disconnect happens. Like we look at other people, and they might not look like us, they might not talk like us, they might not dress like us, or they present differently or whatever. And so we look at that and then we're like, oh, we have nothing in common. There's nothing that we can have in common. But when you actually engage with that person, you might find out that you have similar interests or similar cultural values or similar behaviors or whatever. You know, but I want to help people get past like what's on the outside, and still recognizing and celebrating our differences. And really, that's an important part of relationships in general, to not erase that, but to incorporate that, and also realize that there are some things that we do have commonality on, that we do have a common ground. We just have to figure it out. And it's important for us to, you know, be with people that we identify with, but it's also important for us to really expand our circles and engage with other people and other cultures too, because we've got so many cultures in the world. The world is going to become more and more intersectional, and, you know, more cultures are going to be interacting with each other. I want to work with people to help them build relationships between each other, and, you know, between communities and between societies. Just having that bridge there to be able to have that conversation, and not just look at each other as different, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think it's now is, you know, more important than ever. And I mean, not saying that it hasn't been important before, but with all this like social and political like dumpster fire happening in the world, I think that there should be more like interpersonal like conversation and connection that happens between all these groups so that we come to an understanding. And
Do you mind if I interject?
no, go ahead.
So realistically, how does that actually work with people like your father, who's more of a jerk, and my mom, who's completely selfish and I can care less about her? But like, how does that work out with people who refuse change, refuse acknowledgement, and being open-minded?
Really, I mean, you can't 100% change, like you can't force someone to change. That's the first thing. And you can't force anything on anyone without it being like super toxic or super negative,
Right.
at least in my perspective. So there has to be a willingness to collaborate and to be able to have those conversations with someone you might not identify with, and being able to understand your implicit biases, and understanding that your world view is not going to be the same as this person's, but it doesn't mean that either of you are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like there has to be a willingness to want to interact with other people. And if you have any problematic behavior that hurts other people, you have to be willing to be okay and change that, or at least start working on it. Be like, okay, well, I recognize that this is hurting someone. How do I do that? You might not be able to reach someone if they're not willing to change. And it's a relationship's a two-way street. So I can't sit there and just like send everything like their way. Like it's an exchange, you know? Very gestural with my body when I talk. So I hope you don't mind.
No, please. If anything, I want you to dance. And then even for people as like stubborn as your father or Wendy's mother, like, do you have to take would you recommend any like approaches to kind of like break through that ice? Because, you know, I would assume for them it's kind of like, you know, in one ear out the other, and then try to deflect or reconfigure anything that's interpreted to use as ammunition to defend their stance.
I mean, I would say like be reflective with them. I mean, it's, again, nobody's going to change unless they're willing to do so. So you can't force that change on them if they're not willing to do so. So there's going to be some defense that comes of it, you know, and it's, if they're willing to see that like, oh wait, like there is something here, like maybe I should look into this. Maybe it'll be like a little nugget of knowledge or whatever that they're like thinking about. Get them pondering. It's not always going to work, but like for some people it will work. It's not, maybe it won't 100% turn them into like a better person, or maybe it'll like start to get them on the path that, you know, takes a long time to think about like why my thoughts are problematic or whatever.
For Wendy's mom's case specifically, they have like a very toxic relationship, and due to recent events, her mom's been trying to change for this, you know, for the sake of maintaining like family order kind of thing. But whatever Wendy and her sisters want, she kind of just takes her own path to kind of like shortcut to get there.
When I explain to other people about the nonsense that my mom's done to raise me, they're like, wow, she'll never change. So throughout my whole life, even if there is a possibility, I will never believe it, because people throughout my whole life is like, she's never going to change because this is, you know, her tradition, or like this is who she is and you just have to accept it and stuff. So for her to want to take a step to become a better mother, it's hard, because it's like, in the end, you know, I also need to go to therapy to work on things, because in the end there's a lot of trauma, and it's hard to reverse trauma or like come to a point where you're like, it's the past, I accept, I forgive.
For Wendy, it's like an internal struggle, right?
Absolutely.
Where it's your mom saying one thing, but you're kind of hearing another thing, and it's kind of like just like a disconnect. Do you feel that with your dad, Shareef?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, people do that in general. Like, they'll say one thing, but then it's like the concept of like mood and affect in counseling or psychology. Their affect might be presented in one way, but mood might be presenting another. So they're not consistent. They're conflicting.
Specifically between you and your father. Are there any cases where you strongly disagree with him and he kind of maybe like shed some crocodile tears or whatever, whatnot to convince you to come back to his side? I'll compare it to saying, like, I know people who put a lot more effort into cheating on a test than actually learning the material. So they'll find a way to present whatever answer that the teacher wants to get the grade. But at the end of the day, they're not receiving all that information in their brain.
Yeah. He'll I remember there was one example with my father where I had said, like, I can't trust you. The reason why I told him this is because I can't trust him with like sharing something personal, and he's not going to go run off to his brothers and his sisters and his mom and tell them all about it, because they just have this like culture within their family that's like, oh, we're just going to tell each other everything. Like, our kids confided in us. Oh, let's talk about it. Oh, this is so cute that they did that. When in reality, like, it's not that it's cute. It's just, this is something personal. I thought I could confide in you. Excuse me. Like, I remember one of my cousins, his dad, or he talked to his dad about how a girl had come up to him at school and kissed him, and he's just like, don't say anything to anyone or whatever, you know. And then my uncle's just like, okay, yeah. And then goes into tells all of his siblings, oh, ha, this girl like kissed my son and blah, blah, blah. Which is like completely mortifying, because then it's like you think you had this like confidentiality and like this privacy of self-disclosure with your parent, and then all of a sudden like the whole family knows, and then they're coming up to you at family functions. They're like, oh, how's that girl that, you know, kissed you and all this stuff? And he's like, what? How did you know about that? Oh, your dad said something.
It's just individual. It's just gossip stuff.
To share a personal story, just recently, because of this whole process, it's been very hard for me to stay around and be an advocate for my younger sisters, that like, my mom's there for us, she's changing. Like, it's too much for me, because I just strongly hate her. But I also know that I have to be responsible for my sister. So it's come to the point where like, I won't share as much information with them about my biases anymore, but she'll still contact me. And just recently she was like, oh, I learned that you must listen in a conversation and be receptive. But it's your sister's fault for not telling me about how she's feeling. And it's like, you were accepting blame for a second and then completely blamed everything else on everyone else. So it's like, my sisters don't need to know that. It's hard with someone who's very toxic and selfish to like, the bullshit meter for us, it's so high end. So it's like, even if they're being genuine, we're still like, that's full of shit. It's not real, because I know you.
She would define her mom as Machiavellian.
She's Machiavellianism. So like, that's just, you know, self-diagnosed Mayo Clinic, WebMD kind of nonsense. In the end, she's selfish and she's not the greatest person. But, you know, for people who are struggling with that, there's a bright side to it. You just gotta learn to, you know, unfortunately, you just gotta grow up and learn how to be there for yourself. Like, at least that's my approach to it. It's like, I just gotta understand that no one else is there for me but me. So if she can't be there, I will have to be there. And it's, in the end, you know, it's worth living for, because then like, you get to create all these memories that this person will never make for you, but you did it yourself. You have that control.
It's exactly the sentiment that I thought of, like, when I was going through the transfer process of transferring to a different university. Even like with my piercings, I'm like, you know, my family's going to be really upset about this, and they're going to be worried about what people are going to think in the community and this, that, and you're going to be one of those kids and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is my life. Like, if it bothers you so much, then like, maybe ignore it, or maybe just don't engage with that part of me, you know?
Mm-hmm. How did your family take to you starting your dance?
The majority of my family doesn't know. And a big part of that is because I'm like, this is something that I really enjoy, and I'm not going to go to family functions and then all of a sudden get mocked for it or whatever. I mean, I can like handle it, you know, be like, whatever, I'm just going to ignore them. But this is something that I really love. This is something that's going to be in my life. I'm going to be essentially a counselor by day, dancer by night type of deal. Kind of like Batman, you know, except I won't have a face mask, or like a eye mask, whatever.
You could masquerade.
You'll never know. So I never, like, my mom was supportive of it. She was like, oh, okay, cool. The funny thing is, one of the first dances that I got into, and one of the main forms of my dancing now is belly dance. And so I was just like, oh, wait till mom hears about this. But like, she was super supportive. I think part of it is because like it's from our culture, you know? It's from a lot, it like hits upon many different Arabian countries and Arabian cultures too. So she's been like, she's super supportive of it. And unfortunately she wasn't always able to come up, like the only time she ever saw me dance was like my final senior performance, which was the day before I graduated undergraduate. And you know, like, but she's always been supportive. Like, I've sent her videos or whatever. I'm like, here's my performance. She's like, oh my God, that's you on stage. This is that. And I was like, you know, my mom is liberal in some senses, but in some others, she's very traditional, like with the piercings and with like gender roles and all that stuff. So I was like super surprised. I was just like, oh, I'm going to get some kickback from this. But super supportive of it. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. My brother like knows that I dance. He's like, oh, Shareef dances, this is that. I'm like, yeah, and I do multiple styles. Like, fight me. You know?
What else do you do?
In terms of dance?
Yeah.
So I used to be on Bhangra. So that's spelled Bhangra. And it's a folk dance from the state of Punjab in India. It's very like energetic and you're very light on your feet. There's a lot of the times you're on the balls of your feet a lot. It's very like, it was one of my like favorite forms. Really not intense in the body in the way that it's going to like break you, but like really like a heavy workout. So I did that for a while. I was on a competitive team. I never actually got to compete, but in my undergrad, like I loved dance so much that I was like, let me try a little bit of everything through classes and through, clubs. So I was a part of the belly dance troupe on campus. I was part of the competitive team on campus. And then I was in a Korean pop dance crew on campus.
Wow.
That was actually the first crew that I had joined, and then Bhangra, and then the belly dance troupe.
Shareef in your area. I'm gonna keep using that every podcast. I'm making my own.
Right. And then contemporary dance through my dance classes. So some of my core dance classes were in contemporary dance. That's actually one of the main dances that I do in my dance company now, which I was asked to join this dance company over the summer, which I'm like, wait, isn't there supposed to be an audition process? They're like, no, I like you.
Oh, nice.
I like your dancing. Like, I think you would be a great fit for the company. I was floored. I was like,
wow.
I didn't think I'd be a part of a dance company until much later, but that's a different story. Yeah, so those are my main forms of dance. I don't do Bhangra as much. And then Korean pop, I left because, to be quite honest, like the group that I was a part of was pretty toxic. I very much enjoy Korean pop dancing and urban dance, or, for some people that know, it's like they know it as hip hop or whatever. But I've done break dancing, through my classes. I've done break dancing. I've done a class on West African dance and dundun, which dundun is a drum from West Africa. I did yoga. That's considered the movement part, not necessarily dance. What else did I do?
How'd you get into it? How'd you get into dancing?
So in high school, I had always wanted to dance. And I think you and I me and some other people from high school were going to start a club. And it never went through because, Philadelphia School District was going through all the massive budget cuts.
Right.
So we're like, oh, dance club, who? Nah. So I had always wanted to do it. And then I finally had the opportunity to start doing it. Like, I took my first class when I was at the first university, and I loved it. I was like, I look terrible doing this right now, but this is so much fun, and I want to continue with this. And it was really like a big interest of mine. And it grew more and more and more. I eventually minored in dance at school. So I was like super excited about that. I was like 4 classes away from a major, but I'm like, ooh. I wish I had like an extra semester of funding so I can be like, let's go and get that dance degree. Get that dance, get that bread, then leave.
Next step, comedian.
I actually thought about comedy too to do it. So that's a different story for a different day.
I'm surprised that you didn't, jump into like all those b-boy circles that we had back in high school.
I didn't know breakdancing then. I was like,
No, nobody did.
I could have been like, like this or whatever, like top rocking, but that's it. All I would be doing for 20 seconds, like top rocking.
Yo, to be honest, I tried to get into it because, I guess this is what all the cool kids were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want people to notice me and I want friends. So I'm going to make a fool out of myself in this circle and then go home. But did you have that kind of feeling when you first started out?
No.
No?
I mean, like, yeah, like it wasn't necessarily about friends. Like I was genuinely interested in learning how to dance and really just doing it. Like it was really fun for me.
Oh, did you feel like competitive in any way when you were trying to get in, like into the dance?
Competitive with myself.
Yeah.
Like how you mentioned it, in terms of like, I look like shit or like, and it sucks. Like I have this perfectionistic ideal of myself of like, I need to be like this, but then I don't think about the little steps that I need to get to like my ideal image. So it's like this overall like perfectionistic idea. And then it overwhelms me and then I don't perform well or I don't do well or whatever, like I don't get to where I want to be because I'm thinking about that end goal. Or like I would see other people, I'm like, man, they're so fucking great. Like I'm never going to be like them. Like, and I would just like beat myself up. But like I still continued on with dance.
I was kind of asking for Wendy's sake. She has like a difficult time kind of overcoming that hill of I need to be so and so skilled to.
It's that A-type behavior that's like we can say it came from Chinese traditions where like if you don't come home with an A+, you're disowned, right? So it's a lot of like, if I'm not 110% at this, it's not worth doing. But it's hard because I didn't grow up with knowing that everything comes with a process. It takes time, it takes practice. Because a lot of time when it's not good enough and you want validation from your parents and they're like, nah, you failed. So it's like that shot down a lot. Like all of my interest and ambitions got shot down a lot. So like if I had a choice, I would probably major in something in more of the arts field. But instead I graduated with business to make sure I had a job. Right. But like, no, it's like the only form of dancing I have right now is just dance. Because it's the only way where it's like I get a quantifiable value out of it that, I still look better than everyone else when I play.
Megastar.
So it's like it's hard to go over that hurdle, but I did it here and there. I tried pole dancing and it was amazing, but it's so hard for me to get out of the comfort zone where it's like it's okay to be pretty much in your underwear while you're doing it because it's a form of like self-expression, like you're being fierce and stuff. But for me it's like I can't get past of taking off my sweatpants. But when you don't take off your sweatpants you get no grip. So trying to go back to it, but it's still like a personal battle of like getting to that part where you look graceful and not like a snake up on the pole and sliding back down.
Yeah, because for me specifically, I had that same kind of like I just pictured the end goal, but then I didn't really see a process when it came to photography. I learned all the technical stuff. I learned like cameras, lenses, all the settings, composition. But when it came to putting it into practice, I kind of got stage fright from it because I would be concerned about whoever I was with. Maybe I would be looking stupid, like laying on the floor in the middle of the street, fucking trying to take a picture of who knows what. And then if the picture doesn't turn out good, I get like very disheartened by it. So how did you kind of get past that feeling?
What's the pep talk?
I have also done pole dancing, so I get that sentiment. Hey. I'm like, oh god, I'm in my underwear, and they're gonna like, I gotta hide the bulge or whatever. Like this is really uncomfortable, and everyone's gonna be staring at me, and I'm like, so there's that part. There's definitely that part, and then, I mean, the nice thing was one of my they still have my heart to this day. My belly dance troupe on campus. Really one of the club's values is body positivity. Your body can do so much. And actually one of the nice things was, I went to my piercer to ask him about like a different piercing that I was interested in, but I wasn't sure if I wanted. And, I had to see if I was eligible to get it. And he was like, dude, like your body, you can have almost literally any piercing that you wanted. Your body is like, this isn't to be like egotistical or anything, but like, he was like, your body was like, knock on wood, built great, you know? So like, it just made me feel so much better because he was just like, you could have this type of piercing, you could do this, you could do that, you could do whatever. And I was like, it was the first time that like I had felt so great about my body because I was like, my body can do more than my mind is limiting it to be. So that's a big first step to get through. The second is take it step by step, like work on a skill at a time. Like, you know, don't think about like if you're thinking about popping or locking or whacking or whatever, don't think about it in terms of like, okay, this is where the end picture. You want to think about the end picture, but don't ruminate on the end picture.
In the world of art, the end picture that you have at the start line isn't going to be the same end picture when you get to that point, and then you're going to still want something beyond that. So it's a constantly growing process, and that's something that we kind of have to come to terms with. Like for me, like podcasting, YouTube, all that stuff is kind of like out of the ballpark. Like I had a roommate back in college who was Indian, and one time I heard him play guitar in his room, and he sounded phenomenal. He was great. And I was like, you should, maybe start up a band or something. I was just trying to make some conversation. He was like, no, I would never do that. Like, why? But you sound so good. Because my family would never approve of it. I'm like, it's really heartbreaking to hear, because for someone like me, I always want to shoot for the stars. I always want to do something outside of the box. I was never meant to be this person to be like the 9-to-5 office job. And to hear someone who actually has talent give up on their dreams because they have to coincide with whatever family ideals that are destined for them, it's sad. So would you have any like advice to someone who might be on like the fence of kind of breaking out of that shell, but they still want to appease to their family values and traditions?
If you like doing it, pursue it. And if your family, if it's so drastic to the point that your family is like, we can't speak to you ever again, then consider what support looks like to you. Like, do you want to provide the same for your children? Like, do you want to like react in the same way to your children if they, think about, oh, I want to pursue art, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, go ahead and do that, and like, let's see. Like, you have to think about if you're interested in it, go ahead and do it. It's this weird idea with do what makes you happy, but make sure that you can sustain yourself. And if your family keeps like throwing stuff at you and just making you think like this wasn't the right choice and you're a dishonor and this is that, like, live your life. Because by the time you get to your deathbed and you're sitting there like, I should have done this, I should have done that, you're going to like regret it. So think about it, like if you're going to regret it, don't hold yourself back so that you don't end up having any regrets in that sense.
You're saying, this is what I want. I'm not going to let anybody hold me back from doing so. And it kind of comes into your adulthood, maybe even like later into your later years. Like for me, I'm kind of like hitting like a quarter life crisis. So that's why I'm trying to do all these things while I'm still have like the youth and the energy to do so. But for people younger who still confined by those like those family like morals, like for Wendy's sister, making friends is difficult because of everything that her mom has instilled in her, where everything kind of seems transactional. Like, hey, I need you alive because I have use for you. But if I no longer have use for you, you're no longer accepted in my life. And it sucks to hear because she's in like the prime of her youth. She's in college. She's living on her own. Like, sure, COVID's a thing. That sucks. But that doesn't stop you from making friends and making experiences. And she's not really utilizing this time because of all the like inherent like distrust and fear that's like kind of built into her. So what I'm trying to boil down to is, what would you say for the younger generation who's trying to maybe come to terms with who they are as themselves as they're coming into adulthood?
Here's the thing. For some people, depends on what exactly it is. If it's like, maybe doing something in the arts, or maybe it's like something that's very against your, your family, what they believe in, or what your culture is. The one option is you could just hide that part from your family, and just you could still have that interaction with your family, but they just won't know about that little part. So for some people that works.
Right.
You can also present it to your family and be like, this is what I like to do, blah blah blah, and you just have to be like it's hard to, I'm trying to figure out a way to say it, like you just have to be like, stand your ground, like stand your ground, be like, this is something that I really like, I'm not going to stop doing this. If you like doing it and you're hiding it from your family, or you like doing it and you haven't told your family yet, think about what's going to happen when you stop doing it because your family said this isn't okay, or this isn't like the appropriate thing to do, or whatever. And think about what's going to happen, what that's going to make you feel when you can't do what you love or what you're interested in because your family said no. Part of that is like, maybe there's a little bit of like, okay, think about the regret part, but another part is like, it's going to weigh on you for a while. Be like, there's this part of me that really wants to express this, or, that I want to go and pursue dance or music or art or whatever. But if you don't do that, like, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm. And what would you do in the case that it's your interest directly 100% conflicts with what your family wants? Like in Wendy's family case, it's like mom wants family to come back and love mom because they're all the children and they belong, they're property. And then for the siblings, it's like, we don't want you because you're a controlling bitch and get out of my life forever. So is there a compromise?
Compromise is not just, the one person doing it on the one side. Like I said, in the way that I view a relationship, it's a two-way street. Compromise is also a two-way street. It's not necessarily a relationship, but it's something that you two figure out. It's not just me being like, I'm going to beg on my knees for you to come back or whatever. Like, I'm going to be the obedient child and just like come back and listen to you because you're the parent, this is that, blah, blah, blah. For me, it's just, again, Eastern, being from an Eastern culture might view this as selfish, but like you have to think about like what this is doing to your health. Like, be a little selfish, like fuck it, call it being selfish. Like, this is you. Is this affecting you in a way that's not really that great? Then think about that. Be like, what's going on here? Is it affecting you? Okay, it's affecting me. Why is this affecting me? Think about it. Like, write it down, whatever you got to do, and then work with it. Figure out, how do I not feel this stress all the time? Or what's this factor? Like, you can still have a relationship with your parent or whoever is like kind of telling you, I need this, forget your needs, I have needs. You might just have to have a limited relationship with them. Be like, we call on the phone once a week or once a month. You just have to find that way. But I'm sorry, I can't provide this for you because this is hurting my health. This is hurting me in a way.
Luckily, like, we have that option as, Americans in like a more freer country, because within our traditional homes, like wherever we hail from, that wouldn't really come across. We would get beaten, society would be totally accepting of that.
Well, I mean, think of it in terms of like the LGBT community, for example. And if they, I know it can be really like bad in the Middle East and just West Asia, or I don't want to generalize West Asia, but like the Middle East tends to have really huge conflicts with the LGBT community. It's like this directly, like you tell your parent, oh, I'm into the same sex, I'm not interested in the opposite sex, or even like telling your parents like you're bisexual or you're asexual, or I'm pansexual or I'm trans or whatever, say like that misaligns, and they're just like, in a sense like that becomes a safety issue because your family might hurt you. And it's like, yeah, this goes directly against the cultural values, but sometimes culture is not modernized to accept the view of other identities and other ways of living life. Like, nobody gets to pick gets to pick their sexuality in that sense. So it's just like, in that context, it's like, I'm not making a decision, like this is literally my life, versus like other situations, like I'm trying to think of something else. Like, not saying that your situation isn't like a choice thing, but like, or like sexuality, I mean, but like your health is going to be affected by the way your mom acts. Like, and especially because she's not willing to change and she's not willing to meet you and your sisters halfway. It's, what's the point, you know? And it can be a hard thing, especially coming from like a culture, where family is a huge focus and this is that. It's like, okay, family, like people say blood is thicker than water. Yeah, that's true in a biological sense. Yeah, your blood is thicker than water, but like I have family members who don't give a crap about me. Or they're just like, oh yeah, that's my cousin, or we're family, or this is that, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't care about them. Like, your family can also be people that you choose to have in your life. And for me, that's like, you know, some of my high school friends and some of my college friends, who have like really made like a huge impact on my life. And I'm like, I want you to stay in my life. You are family to me at this point. You know?
We're family, Shareef, right?
I mean, I guess.
Oh.
Damn.
See you. Anyways, yeah. But it's like that. Like, people think like, oh, like the people that you were born from, you know, they're your family. Well, what about people who were adopted? Can you use that same argument with them? It's a little bit like a different argument that you could. It's like, well, no, because they were adopted. It's like, okay, then yeah, like, you know, and that's not like maybe a 100% best argument, but like, you choose your family. You know?
Can choose your family, yes.
You can choose your family. And even people who are born in, who you are related to genetically might be your best friend, you know, or like they might be like true family. Like, we have this idea that like the people that you are sharing blood and genetics with are like the only family. But like, it's not true.
Is there anything that you want to add on?
Ugly Bob says hi.
Okay. Well, I think that should be all. Thanks for all the information and being on with us today.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to shout out, or like social media where we can find you?
Not on social media right now. I'm taking a break, but I will share it with you later on, and you can people can follow me there if they want to see my story, whatever.
Yeah, I'll just put in the link in the description. Well, thank you, Shareef. Thank you, Wendy, for being on with us.
Thanks, Shareef.
Thank you.
And we'll catch everyone on the next episode of the Venture Casually podcast. Until then, have a good one. Thank you for tuning in to the Venture Casually podcast. You can find us on social media at Venture Casually. Please subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next episode.